Welcome, Fright Night Vault listeners. Some homes don't creak because they're old. Some rooms don't feel wrong because they're unfamiliar. Sometimes the dark is already there, waiting for you to notice it. Subscribe to the Vault and never walk alone again. Tonight's audio horror, Pantry Shadow Spirit Encounter Phenomenon, starts now. I moved into the house in late October, the kind of time when daylight fades early enough that you don't notice how quickly darkness settles into corners. It was a small place. One floor, narrow hallway, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s, but everything worked. No drafts, no leaks, no strange noises during the walkthrough. Nothing that raised alarms. The pantry sat at the end of the kitchen, built into the wall beside the refrigerator. A simple door, white paint, cheap brass knob. Inside were 3 shelves and a pull string for the light. That was it. Nothing hidden, nothing strange. At least, nothing I noticed then. The first night I unpacked until close to midnight. Cardboard boxes stacked in the living room, dishes half organized. The house smelled like dust and fresh paint. I was tired enough that small details blurred together. Light switches, cabinet doors, the sound of my own footsteps echoing down the hall. I remember going to the pantry for a box of cereal I hadn't even opened yet. I pulled the string. The light came on immediately, bright, normal, but the dark didn't leave. It stayed in the corners thicker than it should have been. Not black, more like an absence, as if the light stopped short of the back wall. I told myself it was just the shelving, the way shadows collect in tight spaces. I grabbed the cereal, shut the door, and went to bed without another thought. The second night, I noticed the door was open when I woke up. Not wide, just a few inches. I stood in the hallway, still groggy, staring at the thin slice of darkness spilling out into the kitchen tiles. The pantry light was off, no sound, no movement. I assumed I'd forgotten to shut it. That explanation worked until it happened again. And again. Every morning, the door wasn't fully open, but never fully closed either. Always the same distance. Always just enough for the dark inside to be visible. I tested it. Before bed, I shut the pantry door carefully, turned the knob until the latch clicked. I tugged on it. Solid. In the morning, it was open again. No scrape marks, no damaged latch, no sign of forced movement. Just open. I installed a nightlight in the kitchen, one of those small plug-in ones that cast a soft glow across the floor. I wanted to eliminate shadows, wanted to see if something was shifting overnight. That's when I noticed the reflection. The microwave sat above the stove, its black glass door polished enough to act like a mirror at night. I caught myself in it while pouring a glass of water, hair disheveled, eyes half-lidded, the nightlight glowing behind me. And behind that glow, something darker, not a shape at first, just a density, a vertical smear of shadow that didn't match anything in the kitchen. I turned. Nothing was there. I looked back at the microwave. The dark shape was gone. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for fear to kick in. It didn't. Not fully. Not yet. I told myself reflections distort in low light, that my brain was filling in gaps. That explanation lasted until the footsteps started. They weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. Just the soft, deliberate sound of weight shifting on tile. One step, then another, always from the direction of the pantry. The first time, I froze in the living room, remote in hand, television murmuring to an empty couch. The sound came again, closer this time. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing else happened. No door opened. No light flicked on. No rush of movement. Just silence so complete I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I checked the pantry. The door was closed. The light was off. Everything inside was exactly where it should be. I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. By the end of the week, the house had developed a routine. Every night, between midnight and 1, the footsteps would begin. Sometimes 2 steps, sometimes 3, Sometimes they'd stop right outside the pantry door, as if whatever was making them had reached a boundary it wasn't ready to cross. If I moved, they moved. If I stopped, they stopped. I tested that too, walking deliberately across the kitchen, then freezing. The sound would halt mid-step as though the thing producing it was listening, learning. The first real escalation happened when I used my phone camera. I'd convinced myself that if I could record something, anything, it would break the spell. Prove I wasn't losing my mind. I stood in the hallway, phone raised, camera recording pointed directly at the pantry door. The nightlight cast its dull glow across the floor, and the darkness beneath the door looked thicker than it should have. I reached for the knob. Before I touched it, the pantry light turned on. The pull string hadn't moved. The door hadn't opened, but the light inside was suddenly bright enough to spill through the crack and across my feet. And in that light, I saw a shadow that didn't belong to anything in the pantry. It stood upright just behind the door, tall, narrow, perfectly still. I dropped the phone. When I looked again, the light was off. The door was closed, and the house was silent. I didn't sleep that night, because every time I closed my eyes, I could see that shadow exactly where it had been, waiting just on the other side of the door. And I knew something had changed, because it hadn't been hiding anymore. It had been watching. After that night, I stopped pretending the house was empty. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't tell anyone. I just adjusted my behavior the way people do when they know something is wrong but don't want to admit how wrong it is. I avoided the kitchen after dark. I kept the pantry light on at all times, even during the day. I placed a chair beneath the doorknob, not because I thought it would stop anything, but because it made me feel like I was doing something. The footsteps didn't stop. They changed. Before, they'd stayed inside the pantry or just outside it, soft and cautious. Now they moved through the kitchen at night, slow and deliberate, never rushing, never dragging. Whoever or whatever was making them understood weight, understood balance, understood how floors sounded when pressure was applied just enough to be heard. If I sat on the couch, they stopped at the edge of the tile. If I stood up, they resumed. One night, I tested something else. I stayed completely still in the hallway, lights on, eyes fixed on the pantry door. I didn't breathe loudly. I didn't shift my weight. The footsteps continued anyway. That was the first time it didn't need my movement to guide it. I started finding things out of place. Not thrown, not broken, just wrong. A can of soup moved from the middle shelf to the floor, upright and centered, like it had been set there carefully. A box of pasta turned backward, the nutrition label facing out. The pull string for the light hanging lower than I remembered, brushing the shelf when it hadn't before. Every change felt intentional. Every change felt like communication. The reflections became worse. The microwave was the most obvious, but it wasn't the only one. The stainless steel refrigerator door showed it sometimes, just a vertical band of darker reflection where my body should have been alone. The black screen of my phone, when it timed out, occasionally showed a second silhouette standing just behind my shoulder. Never clear, never detailed. Just enough to know it was there. I stopped using the kitchen at night entirely. That didn't matter. The sound followed me. Footsteps moved down the hallway now, stopping just short of my bedroom door. Not every night, just often enough to keep me from sleeping deeply. Sometimes there was a soft knock. 3 taps, spaced evenly, never repeated. I never answered. I never opened the door. The worst night was the night I tried to record it again. I set my phone on the counter, camera aimed at the pantry door, and left it recording while I sat in the living room. I told myself I wouldn't look until morning. I told myself I needed proof. Around 12:40 a.m., the footsteps started. They moved across the tile, stopped. Then came the sound of the pantry door handle turning. Not fast, not jerking. Just a slow, steady twist, like a hand testing resistance. The chair I'd wedged under the knob shifted slightly. I stood up before I could stop myself. The footsteps resumed immediately. They moved away from the pantry and toward the hallway, toward me. I backed into the living room, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to lock myself somewhere solid. The footsteps stopped again, just out of sight. Then I heard the knock. This time, it didn't come from my bedroom door. It came from inside the pantry. 3 taps, evenly spaced, from behind the closed door. I stayed where I was until morning. When I checked the phone, the recording was corrupted. The file existed. The timestamp matched. But the video itself was just static and darkness, punctuated by one clear moment, 12 seconds long, where the pantry light turned on by itself. In that brief window, the camera caught something standing just inside the doorway. A full silhouette, facing outward, waiting. I showed the clip to a neighbor later that day, an older man who'd lived on the street longer than anyone else. He didn't ask many questions. He just stared at the frozen frame until his mouth tightened. "That space used to be smaller," he said quietly. I asked him what he meant. He told me the house had been remodeled years ago. The pantry wasn't original. It used to be a narrow utility recess, something sealed up after an incident he didn't want to describe in detail. Just enough words to tell me someone had been found there. Standing, not fallen, not slumped, standing, facing the door. That night, I decided I was done being passive. I set every light in the kitchen on full. Overhead, under cabinet, even a lamp dragged in from the living room. I sprinkled a thin line of flour across the pantry threshold, not because I believed in traps, but because I needed to see movement. I stood in the hallway and watched. At 1:02 a.m., the pantry light flicked off. At 1:03, the overhead kitchen lights dimmed slightly. Not off, just enough to change the shadows. At 1:04, the flour shifted, not scattered, not disturbed, pressed inward as if something had stepped just up to the line and stopped. And then the reflection in the microwave changed. The shadow wasn't behind me anymore. It was beside me. Close enough that I could see the shape of its shoulders. Close enough that I could feel the air go cold against my arm. I ran. Behind me, the pantry door slammed open, and for the first time since I'd moved in, the footsteps didn't stop when I did. They followed, fast, purposeful, learning, and I understood something then that made my stomach drop. It wasn't trapped in the pantry. It had been waiting for me to come closer, and now it knew exactly where I was. By the 3rd week, I understood the house had stopped being something I lived in. It was something I was being kept in. I didn't leave after the pantry door slammed open. I should have. Any rational person would have packed a bag and slept somewhere else. But fear doesn't always make you run. Sometimes it makes you freeze into routine, like if you keep doing normal things, whatever is watching you will lose interest. It didn't. The footsteps followed patterns now. They didn't wander anymore. They moved from the pantry to the hallway, then stopped just short of my bedroom door. Always the same distance. Always as if it knew exactly where I was standing on the other side. When I shifted my weight, it shifted too. Not to mirror me, to stay aligned. I started leaving the lights on everywhere, even during the day. The electric bill didn't matter. Sleep didn't come anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the outline of that shadow standing just behind the pantry door, perfectly upright, like it was waiting to be acknowledged again. That was when I decided to confront it. Not with anything dramatic, no symbols, no rituals, just proof. I bought a motion camera from a hardware store and mounted it high in the kitchen corner, angled directly at the pantry. I laid another thin line of flour across the threshold and pressed a strip of painter's tape along the doorframe so I could see if it moved. I left my phone on the counter, screen dark, recording audio. Everything was normal until just after 1 in the morning. The pantry light turned on. The camera clicked softly as it switched to night mode. I stood in the hallway and watched from a distance, my breath shallow, my hands shaking. The door didn't open. The light inside just stayed on, steady and bright. Then the footsteps started, not inside the pantry, outside it. They moved slowly across the tile, stopping exactly at the flower line. I could see the fine white powder depress slightly, not enough to scatter, just enough to show weight. The painter's tape peeled away from the door frame, inch by inch. I raised my phone without thinking. The screen lit up, and in the black glass, I saw it. Not a reflection, a presence. The shadow stood in the pantry doorway, fully formed now, its edges sharp and deliberate. It wasn't flat like a shadow cast by light. It had depth. Shoulders. A head tilted slightly forward, as if it were studying me. The pantry light didn't pass through it. It bent around it. The camera let out a short electronic chirp and shut off. At the same moment, the overhead kitchen lights went dark. I stepped back, my heel catching on the edge of the rug, and I fell hard against the hallway wall. Pain shot up my arm as something inside my shoulder popped. I screamed before I could stop myself. The footsteps surged forward, fast, heavy. The flower exploded outward as the thing crossed the threshold. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the front door. My vision tunneled, my lungs burned. I reached the handle and twisted. Nothing. The door didn't open. Behind me, I heard breathing. Not mine. It wasn't loud. It wasn't ragged. Just a steady intake and release of air, as if lungs were being used out of habit rather than necessity. I turned. The shadow stood halfway down the hallway now, close enough that the darkness around it swallowed the walls. Its shape was wrong in small ways, too tall, too still, but undeniably present. It took one step forward. The floor creaked. I felt something brush my arm. Cold, heavy, real. I bolted for the bathroom instead and slammed the door shut behind me. I locked it and slid down against the tub, shaking so badly my teeth rattled. The breathing stopped. Then the knocking started. Not frantic, not angry. 3 slow taps against the bathroom door, the same rhythm as before. I stayed there until the sun came up. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. The kitchen lights were back on. The pantry door stood wide open. Inside, the shelves had been cleared. Every item, cans, boxes, jars, stacked neatly against the back wall, leaving the floor bare. And there, in the center of the pantry floor, was a small square access panel I had never seen before. The screws had been removed. The panel lay to the side. The space beneath it was dark. Too dark. I didn't have to look inside to know what I would find. I packed a bag that morning and left the house for good. Or at least, that's what I thought, because as I stood in the driveway, locking the door behind me, I caught my reflection in the car window. And behind me, in the glass, a tall shadow stood perfectly still. Close enough that I could see where its hand rested on my shoulder. Close enough to know it wasn't finished. It had crossed the threshold, and wherever I went next, it was coming with me. I didn't make it to the end of the street. I know that because the car never left the driveway. That's what the police report said later. Neighbors told them the engine started, the headlights came on, the driver's door was closed, everything looked normal except the car sat there idling for almost 20 minutes before the engine shut itself off. No one saw me walk back inside. No one saw me leave. The front door was still locked when they arrived. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Every light was on. Every room exactly as I'd left it, except the kitchen. The pantry door was closed. They found my bag on the counter, wallet inside, phone beside it, still recording audio. The file lasted just over 11 minutes before cutting out. Most of it was static, low room noise, the faint hum of electricity. Then, at the very end, there were footsteps, not rushed, not panicked, slow, measured, moving from the pantry into the hallway. The responding officer noted something else in his report, something he couldn't explain but felt obligated to write down. There were footprints in the flour, only one set. They started inside the pantry and stopped just outside the bedroom door. No return trail, no second set. I wasn't found in the house. I wasn't found anywhere. The access panel in the pantry floor was open again when they searched the place. The cavity beneath it led nowhere useful, just old framing and dust. No crawl space, no tunnel, no place a person could fit. But the walls around it were scuffed, as if something tall had been turned sideways, as if something that didn't quite fit had still forced itself through. The house was sold 3 months later. New owners, fresh paint, new shelving installed in the pantry, the access panel sealed and screwed down tight. They didn't know my name. They didn't know what had happened there. They told neighbors everything felt fine at first, until the pantry door started opening on its own, until the light stayed on after they shut it off, until the reflections in the microwave didn't quite match the room anymore. Sometimes late at night, if the house is quiet enough, they hear footsteps pause just outside the pantry, waiting, listening, learning who's standing on the other side. And if you ever find yourself in a house where the dark doesn't leave when the light turns on, if you notice a shadow where nothing should be standing, don't watch it, don't acknowledge it, and whatever you do, don't open the pantry door. Well, Fright Night Vault listeners, this is the end of this story. If you have a horror story of your own, please feel free to drop it in the comment section. You never know, the next story could be yours. Subscribe to the Vault and never walk alone again.